Hi guys, welcome back on the channel, and welcome to the research journey behind my upcoming reenactment of the Battle of Poitiers, fought in 1356. This summer we'll bring this pivotal clash of the Hundred Years' War to life using my Claymore Castings armies and Midgard ruleset. But first, we need to dive into the history. To build an accurate and immersive battle, I'm drawing from two key sources. Creating Miniature Knights by Peter Greenhill and Massimo Venturi, which guides us through the visual and heraldic details of the period, and the Osprey title Poitiers 1356, The Capture of a King by David Nicolle, which offers detailed insight into troop movements, deployment, terrain, and key moments of the conflict. We'll explore not just army composition and battlefield layout, but also the personal stories and battlefield roles of notable commanders, helping you connect with the battle on a deeper level. Whether you are drawn to the Black Prince, King John II, or lesser-known heroes, the research helps us to choose sides with insight and passion. All of this leads to a historically grounded reenactment in late July, one that doesn't just simulate a battle, but tells its story. Join me as we piece together Poitiers. This year I wanted to try a Hundred Years' War battle, and after much thought settled on Poitiers. Why? Two main reasons, I think. There are a fair amount of source material and modern scholarship from which to derive a view, or indeed several views, for the battle, but most importantly, it was a very close-run thing. There should be chances for both sides to win. If your game is set up for English archers to sit behind prepared positions and machine gun down the attacking French, then you are fighting the wrong battle. This was a battle of hard strokes fought largely hand-to-hand. When examining the scholarship, one often does not look much beyond Lieutenant Colonel Alfred H. Byrne, classic book The Gracie War. However, his views that Edward was looking for a decisive battle and the Anglo-Gascon army deployed in a carefully prepared defensive position do not convince me. Byrne's interpretation studiously ignores several of the sources which described Edward attempting to slip away in the night before the battle and the troops already on the move having to turn round and return to fight the battle. These two different views are often called the English and French schools of thought. Perhaps controversially, I side with the French school in that I think Edward would have preferred not to fight. And I find the Osprey campaign series book, Poitiers 1356, The Capture of a King by David Nicolle, to give a more balanced view of the possible events. The Battle of Poitiers is one of the most recounted battles of the Middle Ages. Despite numerous discrepancies concerning the number of participants, the unfolding of events, and the role of various protagonists, the chroniclers of the epoch offer a particularly broad and detailed account. The writings of Jacques Le Becker of Swinebrook, Chandos Herald, and Jean Froissart on the subject are rich in detail gleaned from first-hand accounts that describe, in particular, how exceptional it was considering to capture a king in battle. Poitiers, September 19, 1356. The Prince of Wales had decided to accept battle and spend the day while negotiating his eventual surrender, perfecting his defensive apparatus. It seems impossible that both Edward and the King of France, Jean Le Bon, believed in the least that such an agreement was possible. The English army, reinforced as always by a large Gascon contingent, amounted to approximately 6,000 men, including 2,000 archers. The battle corps, commanded by the Earls of Salisbury and Suffolk, were positioned to the right of the main body in the centre of the formation held in reserve by the Prince of Wales. The corps headed by the Earls of Warwick and Oxford was positioned to the left. All were on foot. The Gascon contingent, commanded by the Captal de Buch, remained on horseback, awaiting the start of events. The French opposed the English army with one unusually articulated formation comprised of two substantial corps of cavalry commanded by Marshals Clermont and Audreham. Modern studies place the Scottish contingent of Lord Douglas, previously assigned elsewhere, next to him. A corps, mounted probably, under the orders of the Constable Gauthier de Brienne and Duke d'Athens, including mainly German, Allied and mercenary knights, followed. The formation was completed by the three traditional battle corps. The first, commanded by the eldest son of King of France, Charles Duc de Normandy and Pierre Duc de Bourbon. The second, commanded by the brother of King Philip, Duc d'Orléans, and the third, commanded by the king in person.
The battle began with the English simulating flight. The French would fall into the trap. The marshals, two wings of cavalry, would attack. The English archers shot, and the response of their men-at-arms would repulse the French cavalry charges. The corps of Duke d'Athènes would fail to obtain a better result. Likewise, futile were the subsequent attacks by the men-at-arms on foot of the Duke of Normandy. Deciding that he did not want to meet the same fate, the Duke of Orléans ordered his soldiers to remount their horses and escaped, carrying the two young sons of King John along with their entire escort with him. At this point, the corpse of the King of France remained alone on the battlefield, poised to confront Prince Edward, who, in the meantime, had ordered the Gascons on horseback to maneuver to the left side of what remained of the French formation, with the aim of swooping in. King John, convinced that the forces at his disposal were still numerically sufficient to defeat the adversary, ordered his men to dismount and attempted one last attack. The Black Prince had a brilliant idea that would definitely turn the tide of the battle in his direction. He ordered his men-at-arms to remount their horses and hurl themselves against the French, who were deprived of the covering of shooters. The King of France, pressed between the English in front and the Gascons on the left, had no room to maneuver. It is because of his refusal to escape to safety that the king would be captured after one last desperate attempt to mount a defense. The defeat of Poitiers would cost the French nobility approximately 2,000 dead and as many prisoners, excluding the king himself, along with additionally 30 magnates, including 14 counts. France was thus brought to its knees, while the star of Edward, Prince of Wales, rose to the height of its splendor.
Edward had left Gascony on a large-scale raid or chevauchée, probably aiming to link up with a similar raid from Normandy led by the Duke of Lancaster. However, Lancaster was forced to turn back before the two armies could join, and Edward eventually found himself attempting to march away from the large army that King John II of France had now raised to face the raiders. It was now a race between the Anglo-Gascons and the French, the former looking to escape back to Gascony and the latter trying to bring them to battle. Superior maneuvering by King John, probably due to local knowledge, enabled the French to catch up with Edward near Poitiers on the 17th of September. Edward and his commanders drew up their army in a defensive position in front of a wood, with his flanks as well protected as he could manage. There then followed some attempted peace negotiations brokered by a local churchman, but these broke down on the evening of 18th of September and seemed to have served little but to allow the French army to properly concentrate in front of the Anglo-Gascon positions. During the night, the Anglo-Gascon baggage train and the vanguard positioned on the left flank of the line, led by the Earls of Warwick, appears to have begun withdrawing across a causeway over the marsh and over the river Mioson, which was really a stream. However, it seems the congestion of wagons, etc., meant very little progress was made. And as daylight dawned and the advancing French were spotted, Warwick's men had to begin to return to the battle line. How far they had got by the time of the first French attack is uncertain. The English army deployed dismounted in 3 battles under the Black Prince, Salisbury, and Warwick, except for a small mounted reserve of 60 men-at-arms and 100 mounted crossbowmen, commanded by the Captal de Buch. Each battle may have consisted of a central body of dismounted men-at-arms flanked by archers. An alternative view, which I prefer, is that most of the archers were deployed on the flanks of the army. The terrain. There is a debate about the exact location of this battle, but there seems to be enough agreement about the terrain that affected the battle that we can probably make enough assumptions to build a reasonably representative terrain. The front of the English army was covered by a hedge, which had 2 gaps in it where roads ran through it. This hedge was an obstacle to the French cavalry, but does not seem to have hindered the following waves of foot. There was a marsh, boggy ground in front of the English left flank. There was a slightly higher ground on the English right flank, possibly reinforced by a barricades or wagon laager made from baggage wagons. The ground slopes down towards the marshy area and river. The French did not attempt to outflank the English right flank of the hill, So probably the slopes or the improvised defenses should be graded as difficult terrain in sufficient a way to discourage but not necessarily prevent a massed flank attack. There were woods to the English rear and the river to its left. I should decide whether to include this or not. If the river is not included, it may be necessary for Warwick to start the battle off table and march on as the first French attack is underway. There is an upward slope towards the Anglo-Gascon position, which is shallower the nearer the river one gets. It would also appear that the initial French positions were on the other side of the hill, because the appearance of King John's division came as a surprise and shock to the Anglo-Gascons. So as you can see from this sketch, the Anglo-Gascons in red and the French in blue, the English archers on the flanks, the baggage straddled either side of the ford. The arrows of Warwick indicate his men returning from the ford or even the far side of the river. But how quickly were they able to get back?
So now we finished the terrain. Let's go for the deployment of the English. Regarding numbers and deployment of the French, we'll go in the next episode with some more anecdotes, obviously, and some more interesting information from both books. So the deployment of the English is quite straightforward, agreed by both books, except the reserves of Captal de Buch. But this has to do with consistency of the men he had. So let's start from the left flank. The left flank of the English is very straightforward. We have Warwick and we have Oxford. So you have the man-at-arms of Warwick, who let's say are here. And then you have the longbowmen of Oxford. And as it says, both books, they came from the extreme flank where the marshy area in front of the river was. So in order for them to be able to shoot at the advancing mounted knights and shoot them in the flanks where they were less armored. So I think the left flank of the English is very straightforward and agreed by both sources we're using. Now let's go to the center. For the center, we have, again, very straightforward, the man-at-arms of the Black Prince, who is leading, and here. And also we have the reserves of Captal de Buch, mounted reserves. Now this is where we have a little bit of ambiguity and disagreement. In one book it says that the man-at-arms, the mounted man-at-arms were the full Gascon contingent with some mounted archers. In the other book it says that there were 300 crossbowmen and 60 men-at-arms. So that won't affect our game. I don't have mounted units, that they are missile units, so I'm going to use the Gascon men-at-arms. So the center again is finalized. We know how the English are in the center. And now let's go to the left flank, where we know we have the elevated, a little bit of elevated position. So we have Salisbury's man here with Suffolk. So Salisbury man and Suffolk, probably the archers were in the elevated position here. I'm following, as I said in the narration, I'm following that the archers were at the flanks of both armies, not flanking every unit of men-at-arms, every division of men-at-arms. So I think this is the deployment of the English, very straightforward. I think we'd agree that this will work well, and I think it's something that I think it's quite obvious that this is what happened from both books. Something we forgot to mention is that we have the baggage train here in the back of Warwick that was trying, we don't know if it was trying to escape or if it was a faint flight, but this could be objective for the French during the battle. You never know, we can have objectives. So this is the deployment of the English as we believe from the two books, and I think it's actually the common agreement that this is the deployment of the English. Warwick and Oxford on the left flank, the center with the Black Prince. On the right flank we had Suffolk and Salisbury. So I think this is, and obviously the terrain, as we said, from the previous section of the video. So this is from me, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. In part 2 we'll go to the deployment of the French, some more anecdotes, learning a little bit more of characters, and then we're going to go also to actual manpower and how many units, how many men every army had. So this is for me, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and bye-bye.